Good evening. Welcome to the stable. My name is Reverend Dr. Gia Starr Brown. I'm the founding pastor of this online space where we are dedicated to decolonization and liberation. And we do this through study, through knowledge, to growing and learning together. And I'm really glad that you are here, whether you are here in live in real time for our study tonight or you're watching the recording. I know there are a couple of I've learned a couple of young adult groups come together and watch this together. So hello, I'm so glad that you're here and that you're here with us. We've had a week off. Right, because of the Thanksgiving holiday and all of the things as we're ushering in this new season. And I'm going to be intentional about saying the Advent season versus just the only commercialized Christmas season. And so we took off this time, and so we're kind of back, and so we're going to take a bit of time to refresh our memory from where we left off. And then we're going to dive in together, right? So I'm looking forward to that. And I think that one of the best ways for us to start our time in opening prayer is just a breathing prayer, a breath prayer. There are times when, and all prayer is in conversation with God is appropriate, and God doesn't need perfectly articulated words. God doesn't need wonderfully in-pitch melodies. God just needs our hearts. And sometimes what that means with our hearts is that we do openly and verbally express our feelings and our emotions, and other times the sighs are just too deep for words. And that's okay too. And so that is kind of where we are. So I'm not even going to be prescriptive with how I want you to breathe because I believe that you know the breath that you need. So I'm literally going to set my alarm for 30 seconds, and we're just going to sit in beautiful, God-given silence, just breathing together, and reflecting on what we're carrying into this space and into this day. So let us, good and gracious God, we come to you, to your throne of grace, with this breath of prayer. God, we thank you for the gift of the breath of life, for the gift of Ruach that breathes inside of us, the spirit that journeys with us and breathes with us, God. And we trust that all that we're carrying, all that we're bringing, that we can give this to you. To hold while we're here, while we are learning and growing closer to you, that you can hold our concerns, our fears, our heaviness, any burdens that we're carrying, that you can hold those so that we can focus on your word. And not only that some of us are grieving, God, but we also come with some of us possibly with cheerful breaths, with grateful breaths, with energized breaths, about joy that we have been blessed with and kindness that we have experienced. God, we give you thanks for the wide spectrum of your grace and how it shows up and manifests in our lives. And now I ask that you be with us for this third session of Decolonizing Grief as we look to your word. To peel back some of these colonial layers that serve as blinders for us in being the hands and feet of your son Jesus. Help us with this study tonight. And all of God's people said, Amen, Amen, Amen. All right, I'm going to get ready to share my screen so that we can get moving here. I say this, but every time I say it, I truly mean it. There just is so much to talk about. Especially in this time, if you are just logging on, I was just chatting a bit. I live in Minnesota, and there's quite a bit happening here as we are recognizing and we're reeling from the effects of our current administration's rhetoric and actions to remove our Black and brown siblings from the state of Minnesota, many of which he has openly called garbage. Working with other activists to to right that wrong and to fill in the gaps that is here, not just for the adults, but my goodness, for the children that are reeling and are going to school and hearing the ripple effects from classmates and from other people from what our president has said. And so this is a time I think so appropriate for us to journey into collective grief tonight. That will be the focus of our study, collective grief. But until we get there, before we get there, let's do a little bit of a recap so that we can kind of recenter ourselves into where we have been. I'm also going to let you know that I am going to put on a video for just a YouTube for a few short moments for us to reflect on. And so for those of you that are watching the recording, I'll put the link as I typically do in the comment section so that you can pause the video and you can watch it. If I play it while we're watching, then our entire recording will be removed because of copyright issues. So this is the only reason why I'm going to stop. So we're not keeping any secrets from you. We're just going to make sure the video stays whole. So let's look at the definition of grief. It's the emotional, cognitive, and behavioral response to loss. It is not the loss itself. It is the response to loss, which shows up in in our brains and in our actions and in our spirits, our emotions here. There are many people that look at 5 stages of grief. I appreciate the fact that there is a more expansive list of 7 stages of grief. And while they are in order, we look here that there is really no particular order. Nobody says we have to start in one particular space and end in any particular space. And contrary to what our society and the trends of that we see in our westernized culture have said, there really is not a timeline or a time limit to our grief. So these are the 7 stages we're looking at. There is this shock and this numbness here. Right? There is a denial, like just cannot believe it. There is an anger, whether it's at God or family or involved parties. There is a bargaining. What can we do to remove the heartbreak and the pain that's here? Followed by or preceded by these feelings, right? Experiences of depression, emptiness and withdrawal, and testing, looking for coping solutions. And then also we see that there is acceptance, embracing reality. And I repeat what I'm saying, that we look at this and assume that there will be a time when we will come out on the other side. And while that may be the case, there are times when we could get through all of these 7 stages and then hear a song or a news report or smell, right, a fragrance, and we're brought right back to any of these stages. So I have counseled people that have been in their 60s and in their 70s that have experienced resurfacing grief from loss that they have navigated from 50 years prior. Right? So just to say that this is where we are. And one of the things to think about, honestly, is I was talking with an older colleague of mine who was reeling just 2 weeks ago about the realities of segregation. Coming back into our country, having lived through segregation already, and then to see this again, the triggering that happens here. And it leads me to think about how many people are in our assisted living spaces that are possibly reeling and already knowing that there is, oftentimes limited support. Right? For people that are in these spaces, I think about these 7 stages of grief that could be playing on a broken record on repeat for folks as well. Just another example of this, and for us to think about how we have experienced some of these stages here. Remember that we're talking about decolonizing, we're talking about removing the control by one power over dependent area or people. So the way that we grieve, what we're saying or what I'm saying, is a way that we grieve is controlled right? It is controlled by our administration, by the societal powers that be. And so our focus is to remove and undo that control so that we can see things more clearly and navigate and allow our own body and our psyche, our spirits to guide us through the grieving process. And we know that it could be loss of so many different kinds, right? There's just so much grief that that we see. Some things that grieve some of us don't grieve others of us. Some things that are very upsetting for some of us may not be as upsetting for others. And so I really appreciate the video that we watched a couple of weeks ago with Brene Brown in talking about the differences, right, between empathy and this sympathy of recognizing that even if we ourselves have not journeyed through the particular experience or circumstance of loss, that we certainly can identify with the emotion that is surrounding that, and we can still be a gracious presence for people who are grieving, right? And so even if we don't experience or understand the particular situation, we can certainly navigate and journey alongside, because what we're trying to undo here is the co-opting of the human experience, right? That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to remove this idea of grief supremacy. And what that is this co-opting of our human experience of grief by the political and ideological system that is white supremacy. That is the power that we're talking about, right? Grief supremacy elevates and amplifies white loss, white grief, and makes the rules around grievability or which lives and bodies are worthy of which kind of grief responses. And I think we can see that as we think about, as we look at what's on TV and we look at what's in the news, we look at how certain situations are recognized or amplified, how the media approaches, tragedy and certain things. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago about the show that's called, what is it called? Found, right? That has been canceled, where there is a searching for Black and brown bodies, people that are missing, that typically don't receive the type of support and amplification that their white counterparts do. And so grief supremacy is the colonial element that we're working to undo here. One of the things I wanted to do, not last week, but 2 weeks ago, was I wanted to invite you to reflect on a time when you experienced grief. And I wanted you to courageously seek to remember, right? The sights and the sounds and the smells, thinking about where were you and who was with you during your season of grief. Whether or not, we may not fully remember, some of the things that have happened during our season of grief, but I will tell you that I've talked to I have every single person I've talked to remembers the people that reached out, remembers the people that were present and who showed up, and that is something that is ingrained in their memories. During your season of grief, what was helpful? We remember that too, right? We remember not only what was helpful, but what wasn't helpful, right? What words and what representations were not helpful for us during those times, and why was it not helpful or helpful, right? What was it about that circumstance or that situation that led you to say this is not helpful? Were they offering you a sandwich, right? When you asked for something else, when you clearly needed something else? What do you wish was said or done or shared? Right? What do you wish was said or done or shared? Right? And I want for us to think about this. And I'm going to take a moment. I'm actually going to. I want to invite us just to take a moment. I'm going to stop sharing to invite folks to either put in the chat, or if you are courageous, you can unshare. But I'm interested in your thoughts about this at all. What are some of the memories that you have from a time when you navigated grief? What do you remember? One thing that was helpful, or one thing that wasn't? Do you remember something that wasn't helpful? Do you remember when somebody said something or didn't say something? Do you remember these things? Take a minute to think about it. And feel free. Again, you can put this in, you can write something in the chat. I am happy to start. Uh, I was tasked with eulogizing a very close extended family member, two within a 6 week period. And which was devastating. It's one thing to lose people that you've called family for many, many years, but then to actually, as a pastor, to to lead this homegoing service is a whole nother level. And I remember um, the funeral director who came out at the end of the service as people were walking by to say goodbye before they closed the casket the final time. And we had a window to be finished by a certain time, and we were 3 minutes over. And he comes out and he leans over to me and he says, well, he literally says, the football game is starting in about 30 minutes. And if we're going to rock and roll, we got to go. And he goes over and he closes the casket while people are in line. And I was mortified. I don't think anybody else heard him. I'm hoping that they didn't. I had a conversation with him after, and he told me that, he was just joking to lighten the to lighten the what, right? And yet here he is, and he's closed the casket. And so it was I've never forgotten that. And it has been a couple of years since that's happened. And I refuse to I do not want to work with him, right? Like that, I can't get that out of my mind. And that type of insensitivity. It doesn't mean that it wasn't a beautiful space. It doesn't mean that people didn't have their opportunities to grieve, right? None those things still happened. But we remember the wounds that just kind of that pierce a little bit harder, right? That get us when we're down. We remember those things. And we also remember the people that reached out at 3 in the morning, that just sent a message that said, you may be asleep, but just want to let you know that I'm up praying for you while you're sleeping, if you're sleeping. You remember the things that people have said. So I want to give us an invitation, right? I see that Lori said it's been helpful as people letting her know that they're with me by sending short texts, not expecting oh, look at that. We said the same thing, not expecting a reply or a conversation, but just to send it, and just to know that somebody is thinking without having to have the burden of responding or caretaking other people in helping them to journey alongside grief. And let's look at this too. I struggle with individuals asking me, yes, how they can help or what I need, why I need it. It's hard to delegate needs during trial times. Yes, you said exactly what I was saying, right? You all are in my brain, where we end up caretaking in our grief. And if we don't say something, if we don't respond, if we don't guide, then somehow that communicates to people that we don't need support or that we don't want their love or their connection, right? And so those are things that are really hard. It's even hard to even have to articulate to someone, hey, I'm not in a space to tell you what I need right now, right? Like even just to recognize kind of where we are in this space, right? So definitely something I bring this up because it sticks with us, doesn't it? These things stay with us. We remember these experiences, and not only do we remember the experiences, but the people that we journey alongside remember these experiences. And so that's why these conversations are so important, right? Because grief is something that will continue to surface, and we need to continue to be ready to journey alongside folks. So let's get into it. We're talking about collective grief. Collective grief, also known as community grief, it is when a group of people experience a death or a loss that impacts them communally and broadly. So there is, some sort of an of a shared experience, a shared lament that happens amongst a particular group. Now, it can be people that are of the same gender, right? Or of the same racial background, or people that are living in a particular space or setting. Or it can be people that are connected by a common thread. Right? That may not even be living in the same space. I was reading an article last week about the collective grief of our people that were working with our airlines, with FAA, that had been during the shutdown, right? And it wasn't just in one particular place, but nationally, people were out of work, and there was this grief about, putting food on tables and medical benefits and, paying mortgages, and so it was this. They are a community, even if they didn't know each other, even if they didn't live in the same space, but there is this communal space because they share this common experience and this loss that is here. I found this art piece that I thought was really powerful, that comes from Museo Reina Sofia in Madrid, and it is this image of collective grief, the art. I love that, of processing collective grief. Just want you to take a minute and look at what you see on your screen. Just, I can try to zoom. I cannot zoom in. So you may be able to zoom in if you want, but maybe there's one particular element that is on this, that is here, that you just seem to connect with, right? One particular energy that you see on this screen, that really seems to captivate you. Just to look at what's happening here. Different shapes and sizes, different energies, human, some not, right? Some upside down, some smaller, some bigger, but just something that you recognize. I think this is really great to see some of these images of how people identify, how they're articulating their grief. Look at this one here. I saw this, and to me, it looked very similar to what we looked at before. This is someone else's idea of what collective grief can look like. This is from Rashid Johnson's, and this piece is called Antoine's Organ, and it brings together all of these different mediums, lights, plants, other materials of life, as well as resources within this black steel frame. And this idea that, look at all of this life that is being caged, right? That is being contained in this space, where there is a challenge for the thriving to happen. There's a limitation, right? A concealing that's happening, where there is not an opportunity to be able to stretch and to breathe and to move. Here's another one here that I want to show you, and then we're going to look at this video. Before we look at this here, these reflections on the death of George Floyd. But look at this here. This one here is a painting, and it's called Rubber Gloves. And it came at a time during the uprisings, right? When there were protests and there were tear gas things happening, especially particularly here. I mean, not just here in Minnesota, right? But nationally and globally, there were these protests, and there was, a lot of times there were, governmental force that came to quiet and calm and silence the grief. And there were a lot of distortions with that. There were people that saw grief that takes all these different expressions, and saw, varying elements of grief, and saying, oh my goodness, we assume grief looks like crying, or grief looks like being sad. We never expected that grief would look like anger or rage. We didn't expect that grief would manifest in some of the ways, the protests and the marches that we saw. And then also into a time of COVID, where it is literally just chaos, right? It was literally chaos. And so I want us to look at this. I'm going to stop sharing, and this is the point where I'm going to pause the recording. Okay. So I will, for those of you, I'll put this link as well, so that you have this. But I wanted you to hear, even if you weren't able to see the video, to hear some of these reflections that are happening. And it's so interesting to even hear these reflections, from May to now. Right? So much has changed. And yet, what we're seeing is there are some real significant things that I wanted you to hear in this video. But before I tell you what I saw, I want to give you an opportunity to consider uh, what you could glean from the video or what you heard about collective grief and how it presents in communities. What did you hear that gave you some insight about this, about collective grief? Any signature elements that you heard? I'll start us off. One of the things that I saw that I noticed was this notion of um, of one person at a time. That she spent her time. She didn't expect to have a sweeping effect, right, on bringing about all of this change, but she saw this widespread hurt and recognized, right, what was her lane and her area, and she worked with people individually. She spent time one person at a time. And to know that she's been doing that for more than 5 years lets us know that, my goodness, grief, DSM-5, you see how critical I am of DSM-5, right? Their 3 year time frame is a little bit off if she's still working with people one step at a time 5 years later, right? In this space. Is there anything else that you glean about collective grief and how it presents in communities? And then we're going to pivot and see what God has to say about all this.
I think for me, because I had to close my eyes since the picture wasn't moving, but it took me back to watching the scene um, as George Floyd was being killed. And for me, listening to the voices reminds me, and I hope it reminds most of us at more given times than just listening to something traumatic like this, is that we really are so much. I'm watching my tongue because sometimes I swear. But anyway, we are so much
Okay.
alike. And so, not even seeing the people's faces, I'm assuming that that was a mix uh, profile of
Yes.
humans that were being uh, spoken to.
Yes.
That they weren't all
Yes.
black, they weren't all white, they were
Right.
young, and some of them might have been, middle aged.
Hmm.
So, with that span of humanity, we have more holding on to each other than we don't, than we think we don't.
Wow.
And I think if we're not careful, which is what happens all the time, if we're not careful, we let that other silent slash loud voice change our opinions into something that we wouldn't want change normally.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes. Uh I love what you're lifting up. I actually think it is almost a gift that you didn't see the video, right? That you were just able to listen to the words. Almost a gift from that, just because we know how sometimes our own biases play
Mm.
a role in what we hear. Right? But I love what you lifted up and what you shared, and I think it is that is such an important area to recognize, like that out of all of those people, it wasn't only Black folks that were affected by this, right? I think that intentional inclusion, that's a misnomer. That right that the if that a person who has been has experienced injustice, that only the people that ethnically or racially identify with that person have a right
Mm.
to have a right to have some to share in grief, are justified in grieving. This belief that, like, what in the world? I remember even talking to people that said, to white folks that were saying, I can be sad about it, but I don't have a right to grieve. And I'd say we have a lot to talk about,
Mm.
right? Like, we have a lot to talk about, right? Because we all should be grieving what's happening, right? So for sure, I think for me, that was one of the most prominent elements of the video, as well, was seeing these varying ages and also these various ethnic expressions of people that are coming and being able to speak on this, that it affected everybody. Right? And the fact that it made such global, it had such a global impact, speaks to that, right? And that alone is decolonizing, right? That alone speaks to all of the right the rhetoric that comes from our colonial systems that speak otherwise. We all are impacted by that. Yvette says in the chat that one of the things she gleaned was that a community can change their minds by
Yes,
a
I believe
horrific
that
act.
because the example, hi Pastor,
Hi.
I believe, I believe that the one is two examples that I wanted to just bring up quickly. One was the No King's Day. And so that to me showed me that different, I mean, I was fascinated. I was excited that, I mean, cities from all across the United States, white, black, Latino, Jew, gay, it didn't matter. Like people were coming together and was like, no, and they were protesting. It was peaceful. There was no problems. I mean, people were talking to people. That collective grief, they were
Mhm.
like, they were standing up and saying, like, no more. Another
Yeah.
prime example to me that feels just as prominent about collective grief when Martin Luther King marched on Washington. Now, this was before you and my time, and that's my aunt's time. Hi, Aunt Brenda. Um, that was something that was truly, even though it was Black people standing up and saying that no more, but a lot of people can tend to forget that our Jewish brothers and sisters, as well as other people, stood up and said, "It's it's a crime. It's a tragedy." So these type of movements that happen because people no longer want to stand up, it is a collective mind shift that they say today is not the day. Like I'm not going to continue to keep seeing these injustices. And what makes me sadder is that white people feel like they can't be a part of it, which is even sadder within itself, because a collective grief is a collective grief. Like if you feel something, if you acknowledge something, then that's who you are. You know what I'm saying? Like
Mm.
I don't have to be, I can be an ally and I can still have grief, right? That doesn't mean I have to be from the LGBT community to say I don't feel grief for your transgressions or someone treating someone, what I'm saying, in that type of way, but I can be an ally and I can do something about it. I may not understand everything, but I still have a sense of knowing what it feels like to be ostracized because of my color.
Yeah.
I can be collective and I can be supportive, you know what I'm saying, like that. And I want to learn. And the fact
Yeah.
that you are open to learning is a part of that collective grief.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for sharing. I think those are two really great and profound examples, to be able to see that. And as much as I don't want to, and make you dizzy, I'm gonna do it because I think it's important for us to look at these examples. This is the easiest way. I want for us to be able to look at these examples here as we're thinking about grief, right? Here we go. Because I want for us to be able to see this, right? That this can still happen. Even in the things that you were talking about with no kings and all of this, these stages of grief are still present in these spaces. And we sometimes assume that only certain people have the right to be angry or whatever. But you think about No King's Day. How many of us were in shock that we even had to be out at a No King's Day? How many of us could not believe that this was happening, right? How many of us were bonded together by our anger, by our depression, It's how many of us were bonded by just the acceptance? People that even on No King's Day that may not have gone to the protest, not because they didn't support it, but because so many people are bouncing between depression and acceptance in a very sad and real way, and saying this is the state of our country right now. Right. So exactly what we see, these are elements, what you're talking about are elements for sure of grief. All right, so I'm going to keep on going here because I want to move on. I want to be able to take a look at what God has to say about all of this. Oh, of course, it's going to take me all the way through, isn't it? And that's okay. That's all right. That's all right. I want for us to have a good screen, so I'm willing to go through the moment. Let's talk about collective grief in the wilderness. Really, we're talking about the wilderness. Let's talk about what we're talking about. The wilderness, it is denotes just the actual term of wilderness. Denotes a range. Look at this, a range of landscapes from open plains and rugged mountains offering seasonal pasturage to scrub or nearly barren desert to scorched, toxic land incapable of supporting vegetation. I looked at this and I thought, if this doesn't sound to me like the Sages of Grief, I couldn't even. The term typically refers to unsettled and uncultivated land, the natural habitation of wild animals, but not of humans, a place through which shepherds and Bedouin pass, following pasturage, and travelers hasten to safer havens, which means the wilderness is not always safe. Right? Here I am with my language loving word nerd self. Let's look at what we're talking about. We see the word range here. We see a big spectrum. We see that there are seasons. We see that there are spaces that are very barren. We see there are spaces that are toxic. We see there are spaces that have never been touched or traveled through. And we see there are spaces that are just not safe. Right? And let's look at this. Let's look at this collective grief as we think about what's happening in our world. We can definitely pick this up in this metaphor and apply it to what grief looks like in our own personal and our collective lives. And so Paul Watson is a professor at Pepperdine University, and he broke down the wilderness in Scripture, and most notably in Exodus, right? So in the Old Testament, I never presume everybody knows about this, but in the Old Testament, there are different books of the Bible, and Exodus is about the story of the Exodus, the leaving, right? The liberation of the Israelites who had been enslaved, and as they were liberated, as God used Moses and worked with Moses in concert and like liberated the enslaved folks, they journeyed toward this land that had been promised that would be overflowing with milk and honey. Now, maybe not literally milk and honey, but these metaphors of that would be overflowing with they wouldn't be dealing with spaces of barren spaces, of spaces that were toxic, that they would be in spaces that where there would be life and fullness and vitality. There would be enough, right? This overflowing abundant land. And so while they're journeying, they're in this space of wilderness. And there are some examples we can find about this collective grief, even upon the celebration of liberation. Even upon the change that may happen, there still is grief. There still is this space that's here. And he highlights 4 different areas. He talks about nutrition, protection, organization, and direction. And I want for us to look at these here so that we can find them. We can talk about them. And now look at this here, nutrition. I know it's a lot of words. I'll guide us through this, but pretty simply, the people of Israel needed something to eat and something to drink. As they were journeying through the wilderness, they needed it every day. But food and drink were hard to come by because of the wild, barren nature of the territory through which they passed. So we can use this as physical food. We look around at what's happening. People that feel like, even today, given what's happening with our SNAP dollars and people that still have not been made whole from this whole debacle here, are in a space where they're feeling like they were promised, right? some changes in some lands of milk and honey, and they are still focused on the realities that food and drink are hard to come by. And it wasn't what they expected. And there's grief in that, right? Not just in one individual person, but the people of Israel needed to have something to eat and drink, right? Look at this protection traveling through unknown territory in large numbers that included women, children, and the elderly, right? Israel was constantly vulnerable to attack by other groups who either lived in or on the edge of the wilderness and were more familiar with it. And so here are the Israelites that are leaving, and they are leaving this persecution, and they are journeying through violence and persecution as they are leaving what they thought they had left. And there's limited protection. They're lifting up the vulnerability of people who are marginalized, who are disenfranchised, and who continue to be oppressed and preyed upon. And so even as they're journeying, and what I'm looking at, this is unknown territory. We're in spaces that are unfamiliar to us. And how many times in our lifespan have we been in a situation where there is a 9+ minute video of a Black man that is being murdered on TV, right? Like, it's unknown territory. And even with that, the reality of people and systems that were waiting on the edges and the outskirts, and preying on people who were vulnerable, right? And we see this here, an absence of protection. Look at the organization that Paul lifts up. In Egypt, the people's lives had been organized for them. Things were done for them. Egyptian taskmasters told Israelite crew chiefs what the daily quota of bricks would be and how to make those bricks. They were literally shaped and guided in these very narrow spaces. This is the way that life had to be. And so you imagine if this is all that you know. I mean, we're talking 400+ years, full lives. People were born into slavery. People left this worldly realm in slavery. This is all that they know, is how to move and live underneath this oppression. And people don't recognize sometimes that there is, I preached a sermon last year on missing prison. And the reality, there's some times when we're so much more comfortable with bondage because we're in uncertain territory and we've never been taught or you're educated on how to live on our own. Is one of the things that happened. I'm thinking about the conversations that it's been happening over the past 5 years about reparations. And we know that there are some on the West Coast. There were some real big pushes, also in Chicago recently, but big pushes in California. There was a big push to say we should give reparations to Black folks. We should give each person $5 million, and that will right the wrongs. And what was so surprising is there were people that were on those councils, African American people, that disputed that. And it was very shocking for a lot of people, like, how could you dispute that? But what they said was, if we've not been taught how to navigate finances, if we've never been educated on how to manage money and how to maneuver and move in these things, then how is this going to remove us and liberate us from bondage? Other than putting us back into that. The realization that a lot of us are reliant on the systems that continue to oppress us. Okay. And then we move into direction where Paul talks about, even if it may not be as obvious, but there's also, to me, it's the most obvious. You're in a wilderness. You have no idea where you're going, and you need some compass or some direction, some guidance. And they were in this uncharted territory and had no idea where they were going. All they had, air quotes, is God to show them the way. And for people that have been in unfamiliar circumstances, if you're using a new tool that you haven't known before, recognizing that they probably were not aware of the gift of the holy compass that was God in the beginning. But here they are, they're in this space and they're concerned about this. And we can see this collective grief even as we look around and what's happening. We can see that people, are reliant on these systems like SNAP and these other spaces because, frankly, we live in a society where there is not, intentionally, there's not enough pie for everybody. And we recognize that people do not have the the resources and the support to be able to arrive to a space where they're able to be self-sustaining. And we recognize that there is a lack of protection and that people are wandering aimlessly, that have no idea where they're going or why they're going, that this is a reality of what's happening in our spaces. And if we think about what's happening right now, either locally or globally, we can find examples of this, can't we? In the news of each of these, and how all of us have journeyed at some point or another in this type of wilderness. And so there is grief here, right? There's grief in not the physical things about needing food and water and the grief that manifests in these ways, but there's also the grief of this isn't what I thought it would be. This isn't what I hoped it would be. This isn't what I need it to be, right? There's grief in continued adversity in the middle of these hardships. There's grief in some of these pieces that stays, right? Generationally, that stays. And so let's look at this Exodus kind of piece, and let's look at kind of what we're seeing here and begin to look at where we notice examples of these stages of collective grief, right? So one of the things that Paul lifts up from Pepperdine as he's talking about one of the first pieces is this collective murmuring that happened in the story. They're leaving and they're recognizing that it's going to take a lot longer to get to that promised land. And this wasn't what they expected to be. They expected, I don't know, I'm just going to project my own expectations. I'm expecting a party every day. And I'm expecting, right? I'm expecting fireworks and, right, and music and celebration. And maybe I'm only journeying for, I don't know, maybe a week at the most to get to where I'm going, but like that should be it. And they're talking 40 plus years, and some murmuring starts to happen as people are getting upset. And I'm not only upset at, for example, at Moses, but mostly upset with God. Like, so Moses, you're saying that God brought us out, and you brought us out, and we're in a space that is not, in our opinion, much better, much different than where we left. We are still uncertain. We are still out of control. We still don't have control over our lives. And as I think about the video that we just watched, those of you that have watched it, you know, the recording as well, I'm thinking about the reality that people are saying, we've been in this wilderness for 5 years, and we still don't have the things. Today, there were 6 events today in the Twin Cities. 4 of them were specifically about the rhetoric against our Somali American siblings. One of them was with the city council about preserving the memorial for George Floyd. And it's been 5.5 years. And we're still trying to figure out how we're going to preserve this space. It has become a global space of community lament and grief, right? And so here is the murmuring starts to happen. You brought us out and we're still here. You think about, look at the bottom, the 7 stages of grief, and where just in what we see, where we see that grief. What grief do you see? What examples are we seeing in here? The murmuring that's happening. I'm going to keep going. I'm aware of our time, right? But I still want, I'm just putting this out there rhetorically for us to look at. Look at the next stop where food was in short supply, and look at what they'd said. If only we had died by the hand of God in the land of Egypt. When we sat by our flesh pots, we ate our fill, we had everything we needed here. Right? And even to go so far as to charge the person who liberated them with attempted genocide. Right? Like, wait a minute. So now we're turning on each other. Where some of us think that that's a relationship thing, but even that is an element of collective grief. Turning on each other, suspicion of each other. In our space of lack and worry, we get pitted against each other, right? So even looking at this, that these are some of the elements of what grief looks like. And we have to be able to recognize that, because then when we recognize it, we can encounter and we can address it in ways that really speak to the source of what's happening instead of, turning with our colonial indoctrinated brains toward punishment when we see some of these things happening. But we can have a compassionate response as we see some of these things happening. Look at this here. They went throughout the wilderness journey and they're still angry, right? And even as manna is coming, even as that's coming, oh my goodness, we wish we had meat to eat. Remember the fish and the melons and all the spices and all the things that we had, and now we have none of that. And all we have is this manna. And oh my goodness, we rather would have died than to eat the same thing every single time. This is all that we have. And even in the examples that Yvette lifted up with No Kings and Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., are people that are saying, we've been fighting this fight for so long, and all we have, right, is, and I'm not saying this facetiously, I'm saying this is what grief looks like. Cannot believe that we're still out here protesting. Cannot believe that we're still out here. What are we losing our voices for? Why are we wasting money on the poster board for the signs? What difference is any of this making? My goodness, at least we wouldn't be worried. I heard somebody say that perhaps some of the persecution that is happening on our Black and brown siblings is because of this is what someone told me, is because of the noisiness, right, and the uproar that people are bringing forth in these protests, and I couldn't believe that this was what was being shared. All right, you asked for this. You asked for this. These are the things that people are being told, and it's something to think about here. Look at the bottom in Numbers, right? Let us choose a cat. We're going to go back. If we had never said anything at all, at least we wouldn't be in this space. If we had never raised our hands, if we have never raised our voices, we wouldn't even be in this. Look at the bottom. Right? And the 7 stages of grief that are down here and what we're seeing. And so many times in the absence of relationship, we misdiagnose people, right? We don't even recognize if we're not in relationship, then we don't understand what's happening. And we use our own self-serving lens to diagnose people. And it's so important for us to build this community and relationship so that we can recognize grief and pain and learn how to appropriately sit with people that are navigating it in this way, recognizing that all of these responses are appropriate in grief, right? Look at this one here. They forgot one crisis and moved to the next. They completely forgot all that God had done. We forget it in our grief. We forget. All we remember are some of the things. Some people will say that when people lose a loved one, even if it was a tumultuous relationship, there are some people that only remember the good things. I remember I've had 5 children. And I remember somebody saying to me when I was pregnant with my first baby, you are not going to remember the labor pains. You're not going to remember that at all. And I remember saying, and when I felt like a bowling ball was coming out of my body, I did everything I could to create a visual reminder that I still have 29 years later, because I was like, I am not going to forget this pain, right? But so to say this is because sometimes what happens is, this belief that we forget what God has done. We forget the beauty of the thing, and we just stick with the hard things. We stick with what's right in front. We get distracted by the worldly things that are right in front of us, and forgetting that God had provided the manna, that God had liberated, that there had to be something that they were going to that was going to be better, healthier, lighter than the weight they were burdened with carrying for 400 plus years in Egypt, right? And so recognizing that it turned and it blossomed into being angry at everybody. Angry at God, angry at Moses, angry at the wilderness, angry at, right? Like all of these pieces. And it turned into this space. And think about these examples of that we're talking about, these stages of grief, and where you see these examples in our communities, where people are pitted against each other, they're arguing, they're doubting, their safety, the ability, they're doubting the honor of their neighbors, they're in the integrity of people that they have connected with for years, where there is a paranoia that's happening, and there's a lot of rage, and these things are part of grief. right? These things are part of grief. I think this is the last one I want you to be able to see before we get ready to close. Look at this. Israel's idolatry continued on the plains of Moab, where the Moabites invited the people to the sacrifices of their gods. Now we've got idols coming. We've got people that are turning away from God, away from the help that they have known and they have leaned into. So many times this was the response. Particularly, I'm staying with the George Floyd space because this is the topic that we've had, but I think it's definitely applicable. When George Floyd was murdered, there was a big clergy and a big faith response, particularly here in the Twin Cities, for the first initial moments. And then after that, they dwindled away, right? When the cameras stopped rolling, when the new reporters stopped coming, people dwindled away, right? And what happened were the people that were, that had experienced the trauma of what happened when George Floyd was murdered, people that lived in that community that still do, that were experiencing this trauma that was here, were not only blaming the churches, but there were people then by association that were blaming God, that were saying that these are the churches that are representations of God. And where is God in the middle of these things? Right? I mean, the reality that there is a responsibility that we have in bringing people and connecting people to God, and to also helping them, journeying alongside them to see the things that they're unable to see, and to hold their spiritual hands in the midst of all of this. And so there's some things here that I think are really popping up for me that I want to leave us with before we get ready to close. One of them is the importance that we have, that Brene Brown lifts up, is the importance of connecting to emotion versus experience. So many times, that's the one with the sandwich, right? Where the animal's up at the top and he's offering a sandwich that they never asked for, something that they didn't even want. But here's this connection to emotion versus experience. Sometimes we say, well, we've never been through that. And so we can't identify with that. And maybe there are people that can't identify what it feels like to be persecuted in some of these ways. But it doesn't mean that we cannot identify with the emotions that have come, right, that are aligned with those experiences. Just as Yvette so beautifully articulated as well. I mean, there are times when we can say we may not have been through that particular march or that experience, but we know what it feels like for someone to persecute us, or to dislike us, or to take from us, to not listen to us. We know what it feels like to not be trusted or believed. There have been situations in all of our lives where we know, where we can connect with that emotion. And it's so hard because fish don't know they're in water, you see. And so we live in a society that caters to whiteness and people that are white bodied, whiteness as a construct, right? As a privilege. And so white folks that have been swimming in this whiteness water may not recognize some of the things that we're talking about. And so what happens then is, because that is not their experience, then oftentimes it isn't believed. It's deemed discreditable, right? Not credible. And yet here is this piece that says we can connect with the experience, with the emotion. But if we keep this as an intellectual conversation, that's the thing about racism. See, people that are victims of racism feel the pain. They feel the harm of the rejection and persecution in our bodies. People that do not feel that are led to intellectualize it here. Right? Or I can just come in and turn off the light switch and not be racist anymore and not be swimming in this water. Right? But there's a difference here. So now we're not even on the same plane, because people who are victims of this type of oppression are navigating the emotional toils of this. Whereas people that are swimming in whiteness waters that don't see that are looking through an intellectual phase. So we're missing each other. So one of the ways that we can address this is to begin to consider, even if I have not been privy to the specific experience that's happening, what is the nugget of emotion that I can identify with that will help me to sit in these spaces with other folks, even if I don't have the appropriate words to say, just like in our breath prayer. We can bear witness, by just sharing space without asking for guidance or burdening, right? Or burdening our grieving partners with the responsibility to caretake us so that we can support them. We can just sit in the space and trust that even if we have no idea what's needed, that our presence is enough and that God does the rest of it. Right? This is what leads us to the platinum rule that says we need to switch from this golden rule idea where we treat people the way that we want to be treated, which centers us and our experience. Hey, when I'm really sad, I want a sandwich. And so I'm going to make one. That makes it all about me. Tell me what you want for me to do for you makes it all about me. Tell me what you want for me to show up for you makes it all about me. But platinum rule says to treat people how they want to be treated, which means in order for me to know that, I have to have relationship. I have to be in relationship in order to know how people want to be treated. It is not universal. That's a fallacy. We all don't want to be treated the same way. We all don't enjoy the same sandwiches. We all don't deal with grief in the same ways. We all don't follow the channels of grief, the stages of grief in the same time frames. It is all of these things. And the only way that we can actually journey with people is to get to know them. That's why I love the video and that professor who says one person at a time, because there's no other way for us to navigate even collective grief. You think collective, we should be doing this on a larger scale. But individual relationships help us to understand what it is that people are grieving, how they're grieving, and why they're grieving. So when we come to care about them, we care about what they care about, regardless of whether we've ever been in these situations before. I have never, ever, ever been picked up by someone from ICE. I've never, ever been picked up by someone from ICE, but I know what it's like to have my hands on a steering wheel and be driving in front of a police car and be terrified about the fact that there is this authority that has the power to pull me over right behind me. I know what it's like to live in fear with authority, even if I've never engaged with ICE in that way. And so allows me then to step into that space without needing to intellectualize it, but to connect heart to heart, right? To connect heart to heart. And this is collective grief. So here is where we're going to leave our time tonight. Is I want to invite you to do a few things. I say it's homework, but it's not really homework, right? But I want you to think about this. I want you to look around this week. And when I say look around, look at what I put. I want you to spend some time. I want you to listen. I want you to pay attention in your own communities in today's day and age, and look at where you see examples of collective grief taking shape, where you see it in your own communities. What does that look like? What does it sound like? What does it feel like for you as you are walking? Maybe you're walking through a neighborhood. Maybe you're turning on the news. Maybe you are listening to a podcast, right? Maybe you are reading an article. Maybe you're walking around your own neighborhood and you're seeing different things. What does it look like? What are the smells that you were there? There was an ICE raid right outside of a restaurant in Minneapolis a few weeks ago. And there were people that talked about how immediately when this happened, you normally when you're walking, you would smell the gorgeous smells from the restaurant. But they came and raided the restaurant and the smell stopped, the cooking stopped. And people were remembering that it stopped, that the feeding stopped. What role can you play in supporting the grieving in your communities? In other words, where are the gateways? Where are the needs? Where do you see there are needs that are happening? Even if someone hasn't come to you and knocked on your door and said, this is what I need, where can you see the needs are? Where can you see that without having to be told or guided or directed, to be comforted by the grieving? That's what I call that, when people expect to be comforted by the grieving. But this is all about us as people who are watching and observing what's happening. Some of us may be grieving ourselves in these days and ages, but where do we see it? Where does it feel like for us in our bodies? This is getting us out of our head spaces and into here. Where do we feel this? Somatic work. Where do we feel this here? This is the work for us, right? As we're thinking about decolonizing this grief. And we're in a space, and even as we're having these conversations, and we'll be talking about this next week for our final session, is we're in a space of grief where so many people are grieving in a time when we're supposed to be joyful. Because I don't know about you if you've heard, right? But we're in an Advent season and Christmas is coming, Christmas is coming, and this is a time where people are lighting Christmas trees and are expected to be celebrating with good cheer at the same time as we're seeing these atrocities that are happening. And so grief is abundant. In addition to that, there are people that are grieving not only the loss of individual loved ones, but collective grief. There's collective grief about the fact that George Floyd won't be here for Christmas, that there are so many families whose loved ones have disappeared and are not going to be here for this time. There are people that are remembering matriarchs and patriarchs that sat around their tables that will not be here this year, and families whose children will not be here this year. And this is a time where we have to learn how to hold all of this together. How do we do that in a season of prescribed projected joy, the reality that there is also grief here? How do we make room for that? That is decolonizing work of distancing ourselves from grief supremacy that says we don't have the right to grieve during a societally joyful season. So next week, we're going to talk about that as we get ready to close, about what are the next steps for us as we're looking at living and navigating grief in the middle of all these things that are happening. And we're doing it together. Doesn't mean that we have all of the answers, right? It doesn't mean that we know what the next steps are, but this is the season that we're living in, and this is the reality that there's a lot of grief that's happening right underneath beautiful, well-lit Christmas trees and Christmas carols and holiday songs. There's a lot of grief that's happening, and we've got to learn how to hold them both, right? So I want to offer us a word of prayer before we close, and then invite folks, if you'd like to stay on for our community conversation for about 10 or 15 minutes, we can certainly stay on and have that dialogue. But for now, please join me in a word of prayer. God of the able and the unable, God of the joyous and God of the grieving, God of the past and the present and the future, of the here and the not yet, God, we stand in this liminal space of the both and we need your help. We call on you to guide us in this wilderness of being your people and of sharing your love and your word with people that are oftentimes unable to embrace it, given what's happening around them. God, not only for people that are beyond us, but so many of us are also navigating sadness and grief in our own bodies and our own spirits. And we need your help to navigate that as well, God, in ways that only you can. That we ask that you bring comfort to those, all of us who are grieving, that your presence not only light their paths, but also warm their hearts, that they feel your presence with them and your arms with them, that may show up as unexpected food or 3 o'clock voicemail messages, God, or commercials that bring comfort. God, we look for you in all of the elements that are in the wilderness. We know that you are the provider of the things that sustain us, and we need your help to see that, God, not only to give you thanks, but also to recognize who you are and who you are in us, that we are not alone, that we are not directionless, that we are not helpless, but that we are yours. We love you, God, in ways that we can articulate, in ways that we can illustrate, in ways that we can demonstrate, but also in ways that we can't even begin to recognize or to name, God. We thank you that you are who you are, and that is sufficient. that your grace is sufficient with us. As we leave from this space and enter back into all the things that you've been holding for us over the past hour, God, I ask that you continue to help us carry these heavy loads, that you continue to lighten our paths, God, and encourage us in this work. Remind us of the role, the task that you have given to us to be caretakers of creation, and to continue to care for our neighbors as well as ourselves. Give us the tools and the resources to do that, and to see people in their purest hearts as you see them, not as dangers, not as raging people, not as angry people, but as your people, as your hurting people that deserve the same love and the same care and the same grace that you give to us in all the ways and spaces that we certainly don't deserve it. God, we thank you for what you have done, what you are doing, and all that you continue to do, and that you'll continue to do next week when we gather again. And all of God's people said, Amen, amen, amen. Thanks so much, everybody. We'll see you again soon. Peace.